Let the record reflect the jury is present. Everybody can go ahead and have a seat. I want to welcome you back to courtroom 1050, you've already met all the parties and me, and we're ready to get started with opening statements in just a minute. There's a few preliminary instructions that kind of explain the procedure we go through and everything else in terms of the witnesses and how they're questioned and different things like that, and a few instructions on the law that applies to this case, some of which you've already heard. But I want to first tell you about our breaks, so you'll know when we will be taking recesses. We will take a noontime recess, sometime between 12 and 12:30, and I'll usually give you an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes, sometimes an hour and 45 minutes for lunch, depending on what when witnesses are scheduled to come in the afternoon. But you'll have at least that amount of time because it takes a little bit of time to get to wherever you're going, especially if you try to drive anywhere. It's a nightmare around downtown, especially if it's raining like it is today, or was the last time I checked. Then we'll take an afternoon recess, probably around 3, and then we'll finish up around 5 every day. Yesterday we went a little bit later because I wanted to get the jury picked so we wouldn't continue into that process this morning, and luckily we were able to get that accomplished yesterday. We will run on schedule. We'll start up sometime between 10 and 10:15 every morning. I have other hearings in this courtroom that are called the 845 or motion calendar hearings that have nothing to do with this case. But sometimes, like today, I only had like 10 lawyers. Sometimes I'll have 30 lawyers here, and I'll get those done before 10 so that we can get started right after that. And that's pretty much our schedule so that you can plan ahead. Now, if we're not done with the case by let's see, what's the date here? The 28th and the Thursday and Friday at the end of the month. I am probably going to have to be gone part of that Thursday and Friday, but we may be done with the case then anyway. But I just want to make you aware of that certainly in the afternoon of Thursday the 29th and on Friday the 30th, we will not be having any court on those days. You'll either be very close to closing arguments at that time, or I've already heard them and concluded the case. If we are not finished by the 28th, then we'll go into the 1st and 2nd of February, the first couple of days of this month. So that's our general schedule, so that you can plan. So now you've taken an oath to serve as jurors in this trial, and before we begin, I'm going to tell you a few rules of law that apply to the case. At the end of the evidence, I'll give you the final instructions that you must use to decide this case, and it is those instructions on which you must base your verdict. At that time, you will have a complete written set of the instructions, so you do not have to memorize any of the instructions that I give you. Each of you will have your own set of instructions when you go back, and they're all the same, of course, when you go back to deliberate in this case, so that you don't have to, remember, get the gist of it, but you don't have to memorize any of the entire instructions, okay? All right, as I said before, the parties each must prove their claims by the greater weight of the evidence. I'll now define some of the terms that you will use in deciding this case. Greater weight of the evidence means the more persuasive and convincing force and effect of the entire evidence in the case. Negligence is the failure to use reasonable care, which is the care that a reasonably careful person would use under like circumstances. Negligence is doing something that a reasonably careful person would not do under like circumstances, or failing to do something that a reasonably careful person would do under like circumstances. Negligence is a legal cause of loss, injury, or damage if it directly, in a natural and continuous sequence, produces or contributes substantially to producing such loss, injury, or damage, so that it can reasonably be said that but for the negligence, the loss, injury, or damage would not have occurred. In order to be regarded as a legal cause of loss, injury, or damage, negligence need not be the only cause. Negligence may be a legal cause of loss, injury, or damage, even though it operates in combination with some other cause, if the negligence contributes substantially to producing such loss, injury, or damage. In deciding this case, it is your duty as jurors to decide the issues and only those issues that I submit for your determination at the end of the case. And to answer certain questions I will ask you to answer on a special form called a special verdict. You must come to an agreement about what your answers will be. Your agreed upon answers to my questions are called your jury verdict. So in essence, what that explains is at the end of the case, when you reach a verdict, it has to be unanimous. And you will go back and discuss it. And then the written form, you actually have a written form that has blanks, and you fill those in, yes, no, and the dollar amounts are awarded, the dollar amounts. Okay? But it all be written, so you don't have to memorize any of it or guess on the form or anything like that. In reaching your verdict, you must think about and weigh the testimony and any documents, photographs, or other materials that have been received in evidence. You may also consider any facts that were admitted or agreed to by the lawyers. Your job is to determine what the facts are. You may use reason and common sense to reach your conclusions. You may draw reasonable inferences from the evidence. But you should not guess about things that were not covered here. And you must always apply the law as I explain it to you in my final instructions at the end of the case. Let me speak briefly about witnesses. In evaluating the believability of any witness and the weight you will give the testimony of any witness, you may properly consider the demeanor of the witness while testifying, the frankness or lack of frankness of the witness, the intelligence of the witness, any interest the witness may have in the outcome of the case, the means and opportunity the witness had to know the facts about which the witness testified, the ability of the witness to remember the matters about which the witness testified, and the reasonableness of the testimony of the witness, considered in light of all the evidence in the case and in light of your own experience and common sense. Some of the testimony you hear may be in the form of opinions about certain technical subjects. You may accept such opinion testimony, reject it, or give it the weight you think it deserves, considering the knowledge, skill, experience, training, or education of the witness, and the reasons given by the witness for the opinion expressed, and all the other evidence in the case. Now what I want to do is I want to explain to you the trial procedure that we're going to follow so you'll understand the different parts of the trial that we're going to go through. Opening statements, that's what's coming up. In a few moments, the attorneys will each have a chance to make what are called opening statements. In an opening statement, an attorney is allowed to give you his or her opinion or views about what the evidence will be in the trial and what you are likely to see or hear in the testimony. Then we're going to go into what's called the evidentiary phase. After the attorney's opening statements, the plaintiff will bring their witnesses and evidence to you. And that will probably be tomorrow. Opening statements, and you'll probably end a little bit early today before 5 o'clock because the witnesses are going to start coming in tomorrow morning at 10. Evidence is the information that the law allows you to see or hear in deciding this case. Evidence includes the testimony of the witnesses, documents, and anything else that I instruct you to consider. Witnesses. A witness is a person who takes an oath to tell the truth and then answers attorney's questions for the jury. The answering of attorney's questions by witnesses is called giving testimony. Testimony means the statements that are made when someone has sworn an oath to tell the truth. The plaintiff's lawyer will normally question the witness first. That is called direct examination. Then the defense lawyer may ask the same witness additional questions about whatever the witness has testified to. That is called cross-examination. Certain documents or other evidence may also be shown to you during direct or cross-examination. After the plaintiff's witnesses have testified, the defendant will have the opportunity to put witnesses on the stand and go through the same process. Then the plaintiff's lawyer gets to do cross-examination. The process is designed to be fair to both sides. It is important you remember that testimony comes from the witnesses. The attorneys do not give testimony, and they are not themselves witnesses. Objections. Do you understand what that means? Let me give you an example of that. If there's a witness on the witness stand, and an attorney asks that witness, as an example, did you see the black car that stopped at the stop sign? And the witness says no. Do you understand that the fact that the attorney asked the question does not establish that there was a black car stopped at the stop sign because the witness didn't see it? Now, the attorney may be able to establish that through another witness, but the question itself is not evidence. Do you all understand that? Yes. Okay, great. It is important... Oh, all right, I've already read that. Objections. Sometimes the attorneys will disagree about the rules for trial procedure when a question is asked of a witness. When that happens, one of the lawyers may make what is called an objection. The rules for a trial can be complicated, and there are many reasons for the attorneys to object. You should simply wait for me to decide how to proceed. If I say that an objection is sustained, that means you should disregard the question, and the witness may not answer the question. If I say the objection is overruled, that means the witness may answer the question. When there is an objection and I make a decision, you must not assume from that decision that I have any particular opinion other that the rules for conducting a trial are being correctly followed. If I say a question may not be asked or answered, you must not try to guess what the answer would have been. That is against the rules too. Sidebar conferences. How many of you remember the O.J. Simpson case? There were sidebars continuously, where the attorneys went here. I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum. Sometimes I will need to speak to the attorneys about legal elements of the case that are not appropriate for the jury to hear. The attorneys and I will try to have as few of these conferences as possible while you are giving us your valuable time in the courtroom. But if we do have to have a conference during testimony, we will try to hold the conference at the side of my desk, which is over here, so that we do not have to take a break and ask you to leave the courtroom. Recesses. Breaks in an ongoing trial are usually called recesses. During a recess, you still have your duties as a juror, and you must follow the rules even while having coffee, lunch, or at home. Instructions before closing arguments. Sometimes I give instructions before closing arguments and after closing arguments. I'll usually let the lawyers tell me how they want me to do it. Instead of hearing it twice, they may say just do it once or both times. So I don't know what they're going to do at that point, so I'll tell you both of them. Before closing arguments, after all the evidence has been presented to you, I'll instruct you on the law that you must follow. It is important that you remember these instructions to assist you in evaluating the final attorney presentations, which come next. And later, during your deliberations, to help you correctly sort through the evidence to reach your decisions. Closing arguments. The attorneys will have the opportunity to make their final presentations to you, which are called closing arguments after close of all the evidence. Final instructions. After you've heard the closing arguments, I'll instruct you further on the law, as well as explain to you the procedures you must follow to decide the case. Deliberations. After you hear the final jury instructions, you will go to the jury room and discuss and decide the questions I have put on the verdict form. And you'll have a copy of the jury instructions with you to do that. The discussions you have and the decisions you make are usually called jury deliberations. Your deliberations are absolutely private, and neither I nor anyone else will be with you in the jury room during your deliberations. Verdict. When you have finished answering the questions, you will give the verdict form to the deputy, and he'll return to the courtroom where your verdict will be read. When that is completed, you will be released from your assignment as a juror. Finally, before we begin with the trial, I want to give you just a brief explanation of the rules you must follow as this case proceeds. First of all, you have to keep an open mind. You must pay close attention to the testimony and other evidence as it comes into the trial. However, you must avoid forming any final opinions or telling anyone else your views on the case until you begin your deliberations. This rule requires you to keep an open mind until you've heard all of the evidence and is designed to prevent you from influencing how your fellow jurors think until you've heard all the evidence in the case and had an opportunity to form their own opinions. The time and place for coming to your final opinions and speaking about them with your fellow jurors is during deliberations in the jury room, after all the evidence has been presented, closing arguments have been made, and I've instructed you on the law. It's important that you hear all of the facts and that you hear the law and how to apply it before you start deciding anything. Consider only the evidence in the courtroom. It is the things you hear and see in this courtroom that matter in this trial. The law tells us that a juror can consider only the testimony and other evidence that all the other jurors have also heard and seen in the presence of the judge and the lawyers. Doing anything else is wrong and is against the law. That means you cannot do any work or investigation of your own about the case. You cannot obtain on your own any information about the case or about anyone involved in the case from any source whatsoever, including the internet, and you cannot visit places mentioned in the trial. You noticed during voir dire that one of the prospective jurors, had Googled the information they had. And at that point, I had not instructed that juror to not do that. But now you're getting instructed not to do that. Do not Google, do not research. Don't do anything to get information about this case other than what you hear in this court. Do you all understand that? All right, thank you. Do not provide any information about this case to anyone, including friends or family members. Do not let anyone, including the closest family members, make comments to you or ask questions about the trial. Similarly, it is important you avoid reading any newspaper accounts or watching or listening to television or radio comments that have anything to do with this case or its subject. No mid-trial discussions. When we are in recess, do not discuss anything about the trial or the case with each other or with anyone else. If attorneys, and this is a hard rule to follow, not so much amongst yourselves, but you got a family member at home, you got a loved one at home, they want to know what's going on, and you just can't discuss it. And you can't ask for any opinions, and you can't say anything about the trial. And it's a hard rule to follow, but you have to follow it so that they don't influence your opinions. You're the jurors, not your spouse or other person at home. Okay? So you have to make the decision, and you can't discuss it at home. Okay. Also, if the attorneys approach you, don't speak with them. The law says they are to avoid contact with you. If an attorney will not look at you or speak to you, do not be offended or form a conclusion about their behavior. The attorney is not supposed to interact with the jurors outside of the courtroom and is only following the rules. The attorney is not being impolite. If an attorney or anyone else does try to speak with you or says something about the case in your presence, please inform my deputy immediately. Only the jury decides. Only you get to deliberate and answer the verdict questions at the end of the trial. I will not intrude into your deliberations at all. I am required to be neutral. You should not assume that I prefer one decision over another. You should not try to guess what my opinion is about any part of the case. It would be wrong for you to conclude that anything I say or do means that I am for one side or another in the trial. Discussing and deciding the facts is your job alone. You'll notice that I will be very friendly and nice to both lawyers and the parties. And these are good lawyers, these are good people, and the fact that I'm friendly with them and I'm nice, it's just my way of conducting a courtroom. Don't infer that I favor one side or another because you see me saying hello to one side or the other, or because I'm friendly with both sides. That's your job to decide the facts in this case. I'm not trying to influence you one way or the other. I'm just naturally a friendly guy most of the time. Okay. Note-taking by jurors. If you would like to take notes during the trial, you may do so. On the other hand, of course, you are not required to take notes if you do not want to. That will be left up to you individually. Have you all gotten your notepads yet? Okay, great. If you want to use them, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. Any notes you take will be for your personal use. However, you should not take them with you from the courtroom. Why? Because there's no notes to be taken outside the courtroom. The only notes occur inside the courtroom because that's where you're going to see the evidence and hear the testimony. So don't take them when you leave. We'll save them, and my deputy will collect them, and he'll give them back to you when you come back into the courtroom. Okay. During the recess, the bailiff will take possession of your notes and will return them to you when we reconvene. After you have completed your deliberations, my deputy will deliver your notes to me. They will be destroyed. No one will ever read your notes. So that's so that you feel free and comfortable to take whatever notes you want during the trial. They will be shredded. And I have never read a juror's notes, and they will literally, I instruct Tony to just take them right to the shredder and shred them right after the trial, okay? If you take notes, do not get so involved in the note-taking that you become distracted from the proceedings. Your notes should be used only as aids to your memory. Whether or not you take notes, you should rely on your memory of the evidence, and you should not be unduly influenced by the notes of other jurors during your deliberations. Notes are not entitled to any greater weight than each juror's memory of the evidence. Okay, you all, any questions about that? You all understand that? Yes, sir.
Mine has a bunch of notes from a previous case.
Okay, well, then
you're already ahead.
All right, Tony, come up and get that pad. They didn't get shredded. Rip those out of there and let's go shred them. Everybody check and make sure they're no pads.
There was some black market. Go empty? Okay, I'll get it back.
All right. Thank you. All right. Juror questions. During the trial, you may have a question you think should be asked of a witness. If so, there's a procedure by which you may request that I ask a witness a question. After all the attorneys have completed their questions of the witness, that is, you'll have direct, cross, and redirect, and then the witness is done with the attorney questions, then you should raise your hand if you have a question. I will then give you sufficient time to write the question on a piece of paper, fold it, and give it to the deputy who will pass it to me. You must not show your question to anyone or discuss it with anyone. So when the attorneys are through questioning, if you have a question that they didn't get to or didn't ask that is important to you as a juror, raise your hand and I'll stop and I won't let the witness leave until you have written it out. And after you've written the question out, I will then review the question with the attorneys. Under our law, only certain evidence may be considered by a jury in determining a verdict. You are bound by the same rules of evidence that control the attorney's questions. If I decide that the question may not be asked under our rules of evidence, I will tell you. Otherwise, I will direct the question to the witness. The attorneys may then ask follow-up questions if they wish. If there are any additional questions from jurors, we'll follow the same procedure again. By providing this procedure, I do not mean to suggest that you must or should submit written questions for witnesses. In most cases, the lawyers will have asked the necessary questions. All right, those are all the instructions that I need to give you at this time. And I'm going to turn it over to the attorneys for opening statements. And Mr. Barnard, you're going to proceed on behalf of the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. You may proceed.
If it please the court. Good morning, Mrs. Reed, and ladies and gentlemen, the jury. We are here because a fine man, a devoted father, a loyal husband, died a needless and agonizing death because this corporation failed to follow its own rules, its own regulations, because this corporation used unqualified and untrained or poorly trained divers when they had well-qualified divers who were in helicopters above pleading to go in and save. And that's why we're here. So let's look at these people that we're talking about so that we can examine what happened in this case. So who are the defendants? The corporation is Superboats International, SBI, and that's how we're going to refer to it, SBI, Superboats International. The president, the chief cook and bottle washer, the chief, the jefe, is John Carbonell, that man over there. He has complete authority over policy, over procedures, over everybody. He has complete authority, absolute authority, as to whether or not to deploy angels. And you'll hear that angels are highly qualified professional rescue divers. Not amateurs, not scuba divers who like to go lobster fishing, but highly qualified professionals. He has absolute authority to stop a race, but you'll find that he doesn't. It's his policy, even if a boat rolls over, even if the lives of racers are in danger, he keeps it going. And that's what happens. You'll find that he has absolute authority on policy. And it's one thing about the price, or the prize winnings, or what advertisers come. But when it comes to safety, he has no medical background. He has no safety background. But he has absolute authority. you'll find that the other defendant, the two defendants over there, the gentleman with the glasses, is Mr. Haff. He is a medical safety coordinator, and these helicopters are called Angels. There was Angel 1, Angel 2. Somebody's in charge in that helicopter. Person in charge is Mr. Haff on Angel 1. Mr. Haff is a well-qualified person. Mr. Haff never got wet. In the 9 minutes and 40 seconds, almost 10 minutes, it took to get Joey Grattan out of his boat. Mr. DiPetrillo was the safety director and safety coordinator, medical and safety coordinator of Angel 2, the second Angel helicopter. And he too is a professional firefighter, EMT, paramedic. He has good skills. And Mr. DiPetrillo did not get wet on the day that Joey Grattan slowly suffocated as the water came into his lungs. So what do we hear about? What race was it? It was the Key West World Championship. Next one, if you would. Sponsored by SBI. This was the 31st one. Superboat International has these kinds of races in different parts. And Key West is the Grand Marquis. It's the one that they really like to have. It's the biggest one, and they have, this is one of the items. Let me show you where it is. This is, what we have right here is a blow-up of one of the pages of the program. I'll put it down so you all can see it. This is the diagram. This is Key West. This is the diagram of the race. And the start and finish are up here. Turn 1, Turn 2, Turn 3. Turn 1 is recognized, ladies and gentlemen, by everyone as the most dangerous turn in all of powerboat racing. And why is that? People have there's a long shot right here. It's out more into the water. There are more waves. There's more current. And people just roll over there. They didn't discover that on the day that Joey Grattan drowned. They knew it. They had known it for years. All of the rescuers knew it. Mr. Carbonell knew it. Everyone knew it. And Joey Grattan knew it, too. And so did Steve Page, the driver. But this is if you're going to roll over, likely it's not, the most common place is turn 1. All right, so let's go to the boat in which Joey Grattan was in. The name of the boat, people named the boat, was Page Motorsports. This is a model of it. This is not like a flats boat or a little fishing boat. This is a boat made and designed for racing. It's 31 feet long. It has an enclosed canopy, enclosed cockpit. This is the canopy. This comes up. The racers get in. Joey Grattan was the throttle man, and he was a legend. Steve Page was the driver. And it turns out the throttle man, there are two engines, and the throttle man is a person who can turn, who keeps it going, who goes up, who goes down, and who takes advantage of the waves, the current, the motion of the boat. And it's really critical, a very, very critical part of the race. This boat, the Page Motorsports, it's a 38-foot skater catamaran. Right, so it's built strong. They understand that boats roll over, and it's built to roll over. It had all of the latest safety features. Mr. Page, Steve Page, the owner of the boat, the driver of the boat said he wouldn't race unless it had all of the latest safety features. And what did it have? It was designed to roll over with no injury. And in fact, that's what happened here. This boat rolled over, and neither one of these two men were hurt. They were alert, uninjured, and ready to go. The boat did its job. boats regularly turn over. Everyone knows it. That's why they have Angel rescue helicopters. And they also have people on boats who are divers. And that's where this case ends and begins. Because on that boat, they had unqualified, poorly trained divers, and they were the immediate responders. It had onboard air. That is, it had a tank in the back. And these men would hook up. They wore helmets. They hooked up. They have a mouthpiece, and it would be connected to an oxygen tank. They also have a radio so that they can communicate. They have a helmet in case they get hit on the head. They have backup air. They have a little bottle, a little pony bottle on their leg of air when they take their latch off, and I'll explain that in a moment. Or if there's another problem with the air. Now, this little bottle of air lasts about between a minute and a half, 2 minutes if you're sitting there breathing easily. Now, if you're upside down, you're stressed, you've got adrenaline going, or water is seeping in, you're going to use it more rapidly. But you clearly got some air. So they had 2 supplies. They had a 5-point restraint. Remember me talking about that? Up like this. And the reason for that is so that the men would not be knocked out if they had a rollover. So they'll be held in place. And in fact, they were. They have a latch. And when the latch is, you can't just stay inside the boat when it rolls over. You've got to get out because boats sink. When you undo the latch, that cuts off the big air tank in the back of the boat, which is fine because you want to get out. And that's when you start using the backup air. Because you don't need a lot of time. Superboat International promised, they told these racers, we would be in the water. There's a video to this thing. We'll be in the water in 15 seconds. We'll get you out. And every person who will testify on that stand, the defendants and witnesses we call, is going to say, the racers expect us to get them out. The racers expect us to save their lives. Why? Because boats sink. Because humans cannot breathe underwater. Because it doesn't take long to drown. When your lungs start to fill with air, you breathe. But when your lungs start to fill with water, no matter how strong you are, you ultimately have to gasp. And when you gasp, you choke. And when the water comes in, you drown very shortly after that. You lose consciousness, and then you drown. And it's a slow and agonizing process of suffocation. It's a reflex that we cannot stop. The strongest human being in the world cannot stop that reflex. At some point, you're going to breathe in. And if you're underwater, you're breathing in water. And then you're in the process of drowning. They had an emergency escape hatch. This boat had the latest thing. So the main canopy has a hatch. But if it rolls over, as it did here, you have an escape hatch. And that escape hatch is, if you're in the boat, it's down by your feet. But if it's over, it's on top. All right, so this is the escape hatch. The first 2 pictures are the escape hatch in this boat. And you can see, looking down from a bird's eye view, you can see that dark black thing next to the 2 pairs of feet. That's the escape hatch. That is the escape hatch. The picture to the right is the escape hatch from a picture taken underneath the boat. And you can see what it looks like when it's open. You can see the steering wheel. And the picture right here of an overturned boat, that was in the same, not this particular race, but it was in the same event on a different day. And that's exactly what's supposed to happen. It was a boat almost exactly the same kind, called Motley Crew. This crew was able to get out, and they got out even before the Angels came. You can see what they're doing. They come out the escape hatch before the boats, like this. But what happens when boats start to sink, and why time is of the essence, is this. When it rolls over, it's essentially flat. But then as it starts to fill with water, the heavier part, where the big engines are, starts to sink. And so that makes rescue tougher, doesn't it? Every minute that goes by, every second that goes by, it's slowly sinking. You know what they're called? Tombstone. Tombstone. It looks like a tombstone, but it also can be a tombstone if you don't get the racers done. And it slowly sinks. And then trying to get up a slick bottom of a hull becomes ever so much more difficult. And then, as the water moves up and it slinks down, water comes into the cockpit. Which is another reason why time is critical. Time is critical. This is not like returning a library book. This is a life. Seconds count. Minutes count. The position of the boat counts. Skill counts. Training counts. So it's important because one of the defenses that they have as well, the crew was at fault. Not us, it was the crew. Let's talk about this crew. Joey Grattan was a throttle man. Steve Page, you'll hear Steve Page, was the driver. They were not novices. This was not their first time on a boat. They knew what they were doing. They were multiple world champions. They were multiple national champions. They had rolled over many times in the past. They knew how to get out, and they knew what to do. And they had a boat with the latest safety equipment. They practiced escape procedures religiously. And you'll hear Priscilla Grattan, because she was there. And she knew a boat had rolled over. But she was sure that her husband got out because he was the one that always got out first and helped Steve Page with his seatbelt. Because when you're upside down, it's harder to do, that 5 point. It's not like taking a seatbelt off here, you're upside down. They'd rolled over before and they knew what they were doing. Mr. DiPetrillo's brother, twin brother, is also a paramedic, firefighter, and he teaches professional rescue divers. And you'll hear him in this drawing. And he describes Joey Grattan as the consummate professional. The consummate professional. Not a daredevil, not a thrill seeker, the consummate professional. And these professionals relied on to rescue people, to save their lives when it rolled over. Because there are times when you cannot get out. And everyone knows that. There are times when you get stuck. And everyone knows that. And there are times when you get knocked unconscious. And everyone knows that. And that's why they have rescue divers. And that's why they should be highly skilled. Okay, so what were the duties of Superboat International to the racers? Not just Joey Grattan, not just Steve Page, but to every racer. Well, these duties are, if I enter into a contract, I have a duty, and you have a duty, I pay. This is a much more important duty. It's the duty to save a life. And that's what all of the racers depend upon. All right. Florida law is how we start. Florida law says that if you are producing and sponsoring a race or a regatta, the sponsor must provide adequate protection, quote, adequate protection to the racers, to the spectators, to whoever else is there. So what's adequate? Well, I looked at the dictionary, and adequate means, I mean, we all pretty much know, but adequate means as much as necessary. As much as necessary to do the job. Well, so if someone's asking me to make a ham sandwich, people could argue about how much ham we put in there. As much as necessary to make a good ham sandwich. But when it comes to protecting racers from drowning, as much as necessary means you need to make sure you do it right. You don't cut corners, and you have the right people. Well, the other duties that they had were to follow their own rules and regulations. Because remember we talked, when we were selecting you all, how important it is to have rules and regulations, and how at times rules and regulations can make the difference between life and death and injury. Because here they do. The rules require multiple layers of protection. I'm not making this up. You'll see it. In fact, it's right there. Multiple layers. Let me go back if I could, because I want to talk about that. Remember I talked to you about the skate patch? This is the boat that Joey Grattan was in. This is taken from another boat that was circling. That's the escape hatch. Not hard to miss, is it? Joey Grattan's inside. He's alive. But in a very short time, he's going to drown. Let's go to the next one from Good Chris. All right, so let's look at the rules. They have medical... Can you see that? No? You move this back out of the way. Is that better?
Yes.
You can stand up and go over there if you're not if we need to.
I'll tell you what, I'll move over here to get out of the way. All right, so what the rules say is that medical and safety race coverage consists of multiple layers of protection. In other words, a belt and suspenders, allegedly. Including a piloted helicopter with a medical safety coordinator and trained and certified medical and safety scuba divers, i.e. that is Angel rescue divers, and medical boats with Angel rescue divers. Simple, right? You need to have boats, and you need to have helicopters, so you have multiple layers of coverage, but the key word is you need to have trained people. Trained people. Untrained people, doesn't matter. All right. Angel divers. Remember that. Angel divers in the medical boat. All right, so who are the angel divers? What are they? Well, an angel diver is a professional rescue diver. It's the best trained, the most qualified. So this comes from the sworn testimony of one of the defendants, Mr. Happ. He's a medical safety coordinator. Manned in one of the Angel helicopters who didn't get wet. And the Angels are your best trained, most qualified people on your staff for rescue operations, correct? Our Angels? Yes. The Angels. Let's go to the next one. They save trapped races. These 4 to 6 highly trained angels are there to ensure the safe, successful extrication, meaning getting them out, of any racer who may be injured, unconscious, trapped, or otherwise unable to extricate himself from an overturned race boat. Correct? Correct. In other words, they're there. The angels are there to make sure that there's a safe escape for trapped racers. Why? Is this the first time in the history of boat racing that somebody couldn't get out of the seatbelt? No. It's expected. It happens. You need to ensure they get out. The next one. The angels have to be intimately familiar with the emergency, safety, and escape features of each boat. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because every boat is not every other boat. And some latches turn one way, some latches turn a half of a turn, opens it. Some latches require a full turn. Each boat is different. And you can be the best trained person in the world, and if you're not familiar with the boat and the safety features on that boat, all the training in the world is not going to help you out. It is not a good time to learn when you have a boat that's upside down and you have somebody in who can't get out. That's not a good time to start fiddling and trying to experiment with how to get out of a boat or how to open a latch, is it? So that's why they know that they should be intimately familiar with the safety features of each boat. And it's not just good enough to go look at a boat, I don't know, a year before, or 6 months before, or 3 years before, but at that time, on that day. Because that's what training's about, isn't it? You train regularly so you don't forget. So it's second nature. And that's why all the professional services do that. There's a lot of training. And the reason there's a lot of training, even if it's repetitive, is so when the time comes, when the bell rings, you know what you're doing when you get there. All right. Angels must be professional firefighter, rescue, medical safety people. So, Dive Rescue 1 is a certification. It's a hard one to get. It requires a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of training. And we talked about some of you folks, and some of the folks in the Vineyard, that's a group of people. New firefighters, new paramedics, new EMTs, and it's a lot of training. Remember us asking those questions? It's a lot of training. It's not going out and spearing lobsters. It's, among other things, dive rescue. That's professional service. It's given to law enforcement agencies. In order to be a professional rescuer or professional diver, yes. To have a professional rescue title, yes. Remember that. The angel divers should always be primary. And so what does that mean? First guys to get wet. Boat goes over, your angel divers should be in the water. They don't help if they're late. They don't help if they're up in the air. Would you agree with me? Would you not agree with me that an angel or angels should always be the primary rescuers? Primary rescuers in the event of an accident. Yes, sir. An angel or angels should always be the primary rescuers in accidents involving overturned race boats where the occupants could possibly be trapped. Correct? And defendant Brian Haff says, under oath, correct. Correct. And he's right. The next one. Helicopter and boat divers must be equally qualified. So, we have helicopters, and we have a medical boat. The medical boat, in this case, deployed first. All right. And what's your understanding of what the qualifications are of the first responders in the boat, then? Like, they're the same qualifications that everyone should have. Everyone should have. Sworn testimony from the defense. A qualified angel diver is this. There's no real dispute about this. A trained rescue diver, a firefighter, a paramedic, EMT, a dive rescue professional. You can't learn on the job. Train, you can't learn on the job. You have to be taught. Not an amateur civilian. There's a big difference between a trained, almost military dive rescue professional and an untrained civilian. Racers depend, let's get to the next one, depend on qualified rescue divers to save their lives. This is the same defendant. Would you agree that racers depend upon the SBI rescue, medical and safety officials, to save their lives in case of an emergency? Yes. They know that. They agree. The racers depend on them to save their lives. So if they're stuck, or if they're unconscious, the SBI medical and safety people are the last line of safety. And they depend on you guys to save their lives. Answer, yes. And they knew that before this race started. They knew that before this race was even conceived. They knew it then, they knew it during the race, they know it now. Another rule they have is immediate rescue diver deployment. So, when a boat is overturned, so there are two actually policy manuals. There's one which applied, and then there's another one changed a little bit in 2011. But these divers, for the most part, hadn't seen it. You'll see some interesting email about what the defense was sending back and forth. I'll say that for the top. And here's what it says. In all cases, an overturned race boat with no signs of crew on the surface will justify, what's the word? Immediate. Not take your old-fashioned time. Not talk about it. Not talk sports. Immediate. RS is rescue swimmer deployment. Regardless of any other resources on the scene. Regardless, in this case, of the medical boat. Why? I mean, why would that be the rule? Because the angel divers have all of the qualifications that we just said. Or at least they're supposed to. Firefighter, paramedic, EMT, dive certification. The kind of people who are trained to go into closed spaces. And that's a whole lot different from a lobster man or a recreational swimmer. These dive professionals go into overturned cars. They go into overturned boats. It's not something that people normally do. It takes some guts. They have to have that go-get-em kind of go-get-em the firefighters have to go into a burning building. Not everybody's cut out that way. They are. And they have to be trained. Because when the boat's upside down, you have to go into the canopy if somebody can't get out. You have to go into the cockpit. You have to go into the emergency hatch. You have to get them out. Or you have to deal with them. Inspect each boat's safety system. Okay? That's what I talked about before. All of these divers have to be familiar with each boat. What is the latch like on the top? What's the latch like on the bottom? What's the 5-point harness like? Which way does it turn? Is it a full turn? A half turn? Where are the latches? Can I see them? Do I know them intimately? Or do I have to hunt and peck? And then, if for some reason they can't get the diver out, what is the most crucial thing? We breathe oxygen, not water, and not salt water. If you can't get them out, if you're having trouble, what do? You give them oxygen. You go into the cockpit, you give them another regulator so they can breathe up your tank. So the two people can breathe. People have known how to do that since Mike Nelson at Sea Hunt. I mean, For decades, people know how to do that, and clearly, dive professionals know how to do that. So if they're stuck, if they can't get out for whatever reason, and you're having trouble and it's taking time, you give them oxygen. Why? So they won't drown. And then they're supposed to document the training they have. And the training is, what kind of training do you have? Are you a firefighter, paramedic, and so on? What kind of training have you done to practice? And then, what kind of inspections have you done on all these boats? And the only way to know is to make a document of it, right? To record it. So that people know, you can say, hey, Jim, you didn't do your job. You didn't look at the Page Motorsports boat today. You didn't look at the one that turned over there, the Motley Crew. Well, yes, I did. I saw it here. Pretty easy stuff. But that's why documentation is not just paperwork. It can make a difference between life and death. And finally, another duty that they owe to the racers is stop the race if someone overturns. Stop it. They all have radios. They have flags. They can stop the race. It may not stop like that. You stop the race. Why? Because it makes rescue harder, and you'll hear testimony from the angels to this effect. Why does it make rescue harder? These boats kick up a wake. People hear them coming. There's concern on the part of all the people. And they throw up water. And when you have an open escape hatch, for example, more water comes in to the cockpit. It increases the rate at which the boat sinks. There's a greater danger to the rescuers and to the crew. I mean, what if this boat overturns and careens into the rescuers? But the person who can stop it, the only person, is John Carbonet, the owner of Superboat International. He has a policy. He don't stop it. And the next one is to tell the truth to the racers. You'll hear Steve Page, and you'll hear another boat racer who was racing neck and neck with this Page Motorsport. And both of them said, if we had known who was going to jump in, we wouldn't have raced. We depend on that. If you're going to cut corners, if you're going to use people who are not properly trained, if you're going to keep your angels high and dry until it's too late, then tell the racers. And then they can make a choice. But Mr. Page said this boat would never have gotten in the water if I had known that. And a fellow named Tony Marcantonio, racing neck to neck, said, I wouldn't have raced if I had known that. So you need to tell them who the rescuers are going to be, what their qualifications or lack of qualifications are. Tell them about your policy not to deploy angels until it's too late. Tell them about the policy not to stop a race if someone overturns. Don't let them learn the hard way. Okay, so why are the defendants at fault? And I think you all picked up the sort of the general wave of what's going on. What did they do wrong? They used unqualified, poorly trained civilian divers at the most dangerous turn, the turn most likely for boats to roll over in this race. So this gentleman right here was the lead diver off the medical boat. His name is Michael Howe or Michael Hoff. He's not a firefighter. He's not a professional in any way when it comes to diving. He's a tattoo artist in Key West. That's his job. Sometimes he works construction. This is what his background is. He's a tattoo artist and left out body piercing. He has no background or experience as a firefighter, as a police officer, as an EMT, as a paramedic, or a professional rescuer. None. He has no public safety diver or dive rescue 1 certification, which we talked about earlier. He's never been trained to do what they do. And we know that training. That training is long and it's arduous, and everybody doesn't make it. Some people flunk out. Well, he never even stepped foot in the first class. He's a recreational civilian, is what he is. There's nothing wrong with that. Scuba diving and looking at pretty fish and going after lobsters is fine, unless they're trusting you to save someone's life. He had no training. No training. And you'll hear his deposition where he swore under oath. You'll see. He had no training on how to get out, extricate trapped racers from overturned race boats. This was his first attempt. The attempted rescue of someone who was trapped in an overturned boat. His first attempt. And he'd been with them before. He jumped in before. This was the first time he had ever attempted to get somebody out. And he was unfamiliar with this boat. He said he looked at it. It says a lot of things. But you'll hear from a man named Scott Childs. And Scott Childs is he's like the maintenance supervisor for that boat. So they have a mechanic there when the racers come. He comes with the boat. And he said, I was with that boat 24 hours a day. And nobody looked at that boat. Nobody. Nobody. Let's go to the next one if we would. Mr. Haff was asked about Mr. Michael Howe. He's not an angel. You know, you were very definitive that Howe is not qualified as an angel. Correct? Is he an angel? No, he's not an angel. He's not qualified to be an angel, is he? The answer, he doesn't meet what the other guys are. Right. So he's not qualified to be an angel. Correct? Answer under oath from the defense. Correct. He's not an angel, and he's not qualified to be one. Go to the next one. Scott Lang. There were 2 divers that jumped in from this rescue boat. The leader was Michael Howe, the tattoo artist. His companion was Scott Lang. Scott Lang was a civilian. He certainly could scuba dive, but he was by no means a trained rescue person. This was his first boat race as a diver ever. Ever. And they put him at the turn where boats are most likely to roll over. Ever. He's never served as a rescue diver, ever. He has no background as a firefighter, a police officer, an EMT, a paramedic, or a professional rescue driver, ever. He has no training in dive rescue, ever. He has no training on how to get people who are trapped out of boats, ever. This was his first attempted rescue. Well, it was his first dive, it's the first attempted rescue. And he, too, was unfamiliar with this boat. Those are the 2 men that they sent in. And then they had, okay, so they used unqualified, poorly trained people. And those are the people that went in. Angels got there, the first Angel helicopter got there within seconds. And they remained high and dry. We're going to go through a timeline. And in these races, a lot of times, they had cameras. And so don't take my word for it. We're going to watch sequence by sequence, and you'll see, time-wise, what happened. And we know now how the boat starts to tombstone. We know how seconds are precious, and you can follow it with a timeline. It's rare that you have a case like this. Why else did they fall? They had no rescue plan. That is, the medical rescue people. The angels did. And what's the rescue plan? It's really not a tough rescue plan. It's one up, one down. One diver goes to the bottom, that's the down diver, where this canopy is, and one goes to the escape hatch. So you have two ways to get out. One up, one down. You'll see in this case, it was one underneath, and the fellow who had never been there before, understandably, went with him. It was two down, nobody up. SBI had, believe it or not, they had no written procedures, not one, on the most important job they had, which was how to extricate a trapped racer. So if Mr. Howell needed a little, if he wanted to find out how to do it, even because he never had, he could have looked in the manual if they had something about it. But what good are rules if you don't even include the most important thing? How to get somebody out of a boat. I mean, what is more important in a boat race than how to get somebody out if it overturns? When they know these boats overturn regularly. But the divers aren't hurt. For the most part, they're just rolled over. They're strapped in. They had no, I mentioned this before, they had no documented training and no documented inspection of the boats. Then, the next thing they did is the civilian diver, Mike Howell, after he goes underneath this boat, he comes up after a while. He has a scuba tank, he has a big scuba tank. He comes up and gives the OK sign to the helicopter. He gives the OK sign. Because he sees them, they're not hurt. He has a story. His story is that they were both out of their seats. They were sitting with their bottoms on the top of the canopy, and they were talking. They were carrying on a conversation, an animated conversation. And I think you'll hear from the angel divers, that doesn't make sense to them. When a boat is upside down and water is pouring in, the last thing you do is carry on an animated conversation. The implication is somebody saying, hey, you would after something like that. Does that make sense? But what civilian diver Howe did when he gave the okay is he misled others. He misled the Angels Club. He delayed others because they got the okay. And the testimony will be, could you go to the next one, please? Don't take my word for it. This is their sworn testimony in this case. I'm just asking you as a professional, Mr. Pardo, Ricky Pardo, is another certified, qualified agent, firefighter, paramedic. I'm asking you as a professional because it was. Is it okay to give that OK signal, before the racers are actually out and at the surface of the water? The witness says he probably should have never given the OK signal at that point. Question: would you have ever done that? Answer: under oath, no. All right, so what's the rule? These helmets are bright orange for a reason. They are supposed to deploy, the Angels are, unless they see two bright orange helmets either out of the boat or on the surface of the water. There's a reason for this go. That's a rule, and that's a critical rule. And if you don't see them out of the water, you deploy that anyway, no matter what your civilian diver says. They failed to immediately deploy. That was a critical mistake. A critical mistake. So the best trained divers were up there circling in the air, watching. There are no helmets on the water. There's nobody up on the top of what's now the bottom of the boat. Nobody up by the emergency hatch. Emergency hatch isn't open. And still they hover. And time goes by. You know, and as we talk, just imagine what's happening as your air is starting to run out. And the boat starts to turn. Starts to tombstone and more water comes in. That's what's going on. And they knew that. This is not news to Superboat International. They knew what happened. Boats filled with water. They know that people cannot breathe underwater. And they know that if they cannot breathe, they will die. And they will die a horrible death. In fact, as I said, the policy of this company is not to deploy because we want the boats to keep going. See, if you deploy these Angels, then you don't have enough helicopters. So what if some other boat overturns? Then you can't. Then the race has to stop. You might have to refund entrance fees. Lord knows. So what's happening up in this Angel helicopter that's hovering? Well, there's a dive safety coordinator, the head guy of the helicopter. And there are two professional divers. And what did they want to do? Because they know they did not see orange helmets on the top of the water. They knew that the emergency hatch was not open. They knew that these men could be in trouble and drowning. And so what did they want to do? These are the divers, Mr. Pardo and Mr. Majeski. They vehemently requested the head angel to deploy. Let us go get them. No. There was a time period, according to the sworn testimony of Angel Rick Pardo, where you testified to where you were vehemently requesting that Mr. DiPetrillo, he was the head of that helicopter, give you the go-ahead to deploy. Right? Answer, yes. This is sworn testimony from the defense. And he refused to give you that go-ahead to deploy. Correct? Answer, yes. The next thing they did wrong, the next reason they're at fault, is these civilian divers had improper equipment. They had no ability to supply air. Could have. But they didn't. Mr. Howe had what's called a giant tank. That's how it was described. Meaning it's a big recreational scuba tank. And you'll see it when we go through the timeline. What did that mean? And he's a skinny guy, by the way. That meant he couldn't get into the emergency escape hatch. His tank wouldn't let him get in. The other Angel divers have small tanks that professionals use, that the military uses. Why? So they can get into enclosed spaces. He was stuck. Couldn't get in. And he didn't have any seatbelt shoes. I mean, of all the things you want to carry, a seatbelt shoe. He didn't have that. And then they failed to stop the race. And you'll watch in the background as you see these photographs. There's a boat by the name of the J.D. Byrider. We'll watch it. You'll see it twice go around. They failed to stop the race. And even the defense, not Mr. Carpenter, that the Angel said they made it hard. They should have stopped. All right. And then even the Angel divers, the professional Angel divers, were not familiar with the escape hatches and the latches of this boat. They had trouble getting this hatch open. And you'll see, we have the hatch. You'll see it when Mr. Steve Page testifies. And the reason they had trouble with it is because they were overturning it. Now, you can understand why. The adrenaline's flowing, they want to get people out, they turned it too far. And so they turned it past opening to relocking it. And then they would turn it again, and they would turn it again. And they couldn't get it open. This big canopy was finally opened, believe it or not, at about the 9.5-minute mark by a Towboat USA diver who came chugging along. They're there to pull out the boats that roll over, who had a crowbar. He had no training. Just used a crowbar and took it off. 9.5 minutes. Okay. What happened? Now we get to see, picture by picture, time by time, what happened. We're going to start from the point of 0 as the boat is rounding turn 1. They have a marker there, and that is the Page Motorsports boat. Let's go to the next one, Chris. It rolls over. And the rollover is where we start marking time. It's not a violent rollover. It's one that's expected. Neither racer is hurt. Let's go to the next one. This is what it looks like underneath. Joey Gratton's on one side. Steve Page is on the other. They're upside down. And according to Mr. Page, they'll testify that they were both conscious, they were uninjured, and they were suspended upside down, of course, when it's upside down. They were restrained in their seats by the harness, and they couldn't get out immediately on their own. Okay, so they're upside down. First thing they're taught is, you brace if you're going to crash or you're going to roll over. And then you put your hand up to push yourself off so that you can undo your latch. So far, so good. Let's go to the next one. And you can see now, 45 seconds later. So time is of the essence, and you'll hear this again and again in this case. When there is a rollover, the helicopter drops a flare, and it kicks up orange smoke, so people know there's a problem. And you can see the orange smoke in the background. And now 45 seconds later, you can see the boat still at an angle. It's starting to sink a bit, but it's still definitely an approachable angle. And you can see that boat to the left. And then you see the caption that says dive. If you look really closely, I can see it, I don't know if you all can, he has a very brilliant yellow scuba tank. This is Michael Howe. And if you notice, that orange smoke would only come from a helicopter. There are no helicopter divers in the water. People in the water are Michael Howe, and it doesn't show Mr. Lang, but those two civilian divers. No injuries. Go to the next one. About 9 seconds later, 54 seconds into it, we see one of the two civilian divers with his hand on the side of the hull. The canopy is right underneath. They can see in. They know that the racers are not hurt and they're not unconscious. They also know that they're still in and not out. This is about a minute later. It doesn't take long to get out of one of these boats. And we expect that you'll either hear from Mr. Page or even see a video of another rollover from inside the cockpit. And you can see how quickly it's done. It's very quick, very professional. You're in, you're out. Unbuckle yourself, and you get out, unless you're stuck. Let's go to the next one. So, a little bit later, a minute, 12 seconds later, you can still see the orange smoke. You can see the Page Motorsports. But wait a minute, what are we seeing here? Another boat continuing the race. The race has not been stopped. Let's go to the next one. Now, about a minute and a half. A minute and a half. The pony bottle has maybe 2 minutes. There's some air inside the cockpit before it fills with water, but there's not a lot of time. And who knew that? Who knew that? Every single rescue diver that was employed that day. Mr. Carbonell knew that. The racers knew that time is of the essence. That they expected qualified people to save it, not civilian lobstermen. Right here, we see the orange smoke. That bow of that boat that's in the foreground, that's the medical boat. And there you have a nice, clear picture of the escape hatch. Easy to access, easy to get to at this point. Easy to save a life. Next one, please. Usually, when there was a rollover, Mr. Grattan, well, you'll find out he was a terrific athlete, was almost always the first one out. And he would help Steve Page get out of his harness. This time, for some reason, and no one really knows now, Joey Grattan could not get out of his harness at that point. He was stuck. And so Steve Page gets out and spends time. The reason there's nobody up out of the boat, the reason it's now a minute and a half, is because Steve Page, the driver, is trying to get his partner out. He's working on him. He's trying to get him out of the harness. Next one, please. Now we're almost up to 2 minutes. Same orange smoke. If you notice the angle of the boat, you notice it's starting to tilt, starting to sink. More time. No angels in the water. We know that there's orange smoke. We know that 2 civilians are in there. And finally, after about 2 minutes, a minute and 52 seconds, Steve Page says, I can't get him out. I'm going to get help, which he expected immediately. And he, Mr. Page, is opening, you can just see it, he's opening the escape hatch. Okay, so he's unlatching it and coming out. Let's go to the next one. This is 2 minutes and 30 seconds later. 2 minutes and 30 seconds is an eternity where you're upside down and the water is still in your cover. Finally, the first rescue diver deploys. 2.5 minutes later. They knew that that pony bottle had at most 2 minutes in it. They knew that when you unlatch your seatbelt, the major air tank, the big air tank, is cut off. They knew that divers can get stuck. And they knew that there were no orange helmets on the surface of the water. And they knew that because they asked Mr. DiPetrillo to deploy immediately. They asked him vehemently, and he said no. And he said no. Go to the next one. This is the second Angel diver coming out. You can just see in the background, past this medical boat, the outline of the upside down Page Motorsports boat. Let's go to the next one, Chris. 20 seconds later, approximately, the helicopter divers were pretty far away because there were so many other boats there. They were in the way, including the medical boat. So it was a bit of a swim for him to get there before they could even get to the boat. We're now almost at 3 minutes, not quite. And if you can see that little round circle, and we'll go to the next one, please. That's Mr. Page. He's at the emergency escape hatch. And his mouth is open. And he is screaming, get him out. Get my buddy out. He's stuck. Get him out. And if they didn't know by 3 minutes that something was wrong, they sure knew then. Go to the next one. This is another 40 seconds later. Now look at the boat. Look at the angle of it. Look how much sinkage is going on. And who's there? Well, let's start in the background. You see that other boat back there, that speedboat going by? That is the boat. This is on their second lap. They're doing. They overturned on the last lap. They're doing an extra lap. Why? Because no one stopped the race. It's doing exactly what they should not do. The racers are not doing anything wrong. It's the people, the sponsor, SBI, because it kicks up more water, puts more water into that open escape hatch, makes the rescue more difficult. So we have the escape hatch. We have this Mike Howell, the civilian diver, up there by the escape hatch. We have Steve Page. You really can't see it right there. Steve Page is, of course, the driver. Scott Lang is his buddy who's never been there before. And then the first angel, this Kyle Majeski, he hasn't even reached the boat yet. He's close, but he hasn't reached it. 3 minutes and 40 seconds waiting. And there's a man there who can't breathe. Let's go to the next one. 2 seconds later, we have another shot. 3 minutes and 42 seconds. Now, we'll start. Mike Houck, the civilian diver, the tattoo artist, has that big yellow scuba tank. You all can see that. It's a big recreational scuba tank. And he's right there at the escape hatch. He's got his hand on it, sort of up like that. Steve Page, you can see a little head right there. That's the driver. And there, to the right, is a helicopter diver. So one of the problems is that the person who's there at the escape hatch is the most unqualified. A rescue diver goes in. A rescue diver shares air if you can't get him out. And Michael Hawk is right there. He's looking in. Let's go to the next one. Let me back up because there's an important series of conversation. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Steve Page says, "Get him out, get him out." And he says, he testifies under oath, Joey Gratton was fighting for his life. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Fighting for his life. Michael Howell looks in at the same time and testifies he was already dead. We're effed. You watch these witnesses. You just stop. Just tell me. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Let's go to the next one. 7 minutes and 20 seconds. That boat is Tombstone. That boat is down. There's water in the escape hatch. Joey Gratton cannot breathe. This is about 3 minutes and 20 seconds, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, after Steve Page says he was fighting for his life. Orange smoke is still there. There's some divers out by the boat. Joey Gratton is still in the boat. Let's go to the next one. 9 minutes and 10 seconds later. 9 minutes and 10 seconds. Joey Gratton is still trapped. No one has given him oxygen. No one has gotten into the cockpit. And no one has taken off the canopy. Because they were overturned. And here's what we have. Towboat US or Sea-Tow. These are the kind of people that if your boat conks out, they'll come get you. Or they'll tow the boat. And that's what they did. There's a spec right there, and that happens to be the Towboat US diver. Not a rescue diver. He says, "I'm not a rescue diver." He comes down, takes a crowbar, takes off the canopy. And just at that moment, let's go to the next one. About 30 seconds later, he's pulled out by somebody else. Still, at 9:40, this is the second Angel helicopter. They've been hovering too. And not until 9 minutes and 40 seconds later did the second Angel helicopter deploy. I mean, even a dolphin, a porpoise, could probably not have survived 9 minutes and 40 seconds underwater without breathing. Certainly not a human being. Let's go to the next one. At 11 minutes, they get him out, approximately. Now take a look at that boat. It's almost completely sunk. They have a rescue diver. They have Joey Grattan, who fell over to the right. There's another rescue diver. You can see Joey Grattan because you can see that orange helmet. Let's go to the next one. When they're pulling him, they are unfortunately pulling him with his head under the water. At 11 minutes. Maybe they gave up. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they didn't. Let's go to the next one. And at 12 minutes and 10 seconds, an unconscious Joey Grattan is pulled into the 12 minutes and 10 seconds. So, what are the defenses? I mean, they have defenses, and so we need to talk about them a little bit. So the defenses are Michael Howe, the body piercer, the tattoo artist, had on-the-job training. There's a fellow named Harshfield who was in the second Angel helicopter that didn't jump until 9 minutes and 40 seconds. He doesn't really know what happened, but he says, oh yes, I trained. So we said, well, where's the documentation? Well, there is none. And we asked the other divers, well, who trained him? Well, I don't know. How much training did he get? I don't know. Did he ever save anybody before? No, I don't know. And we asked him, and he said, no, I did not. There's no record, and he has no qualifications. None. He never stood for the firefighter's exam. He never took those years of training. He never stood for the paramedics exam. He never took those years of training. He never stood for the EMT exam. He never took those years of training. He never stood for Dive Rescue International certification. He never took those years of training. But they say he has qualifications. They say, Mr. Howe, well, he's a good swimmer. They could have had Michael Phelps there. The Olympian. But it doesn't matter how fast he got there. You need to know what to do when you get there. And he didn't. They say, well, the racers took off their helmets, so they didn't get any oxygen. Well, ultimately, their helmets came off, and I'll tell you why the Joey Grattan would have. When you have that pony bottle, and you have 2 minutes, or a minute and a half if you're stressed, and you run out, you are sucking the mouthpiece. You get no air. But there was still air in the cockpit. What would any rational person have done? Sit there and try and breathe against nothing? Or take off the helmet, or at least part of the helmet, so you could breathe what air was still in the cockpit? It's not much of a defense. And in fact, there's a dispute about that. Whether the helmet was actually off, the mouthpiece was. Because the towboat U.S. driver, who doesn't have an axe to grind, he's not on one side or the other, said, when I saw him, he was upside down. There was movement as the water was moving. He was in his seat with his helmet on. May not have had the mouthpiece on. And then Mr. Howe said he took it all off. They had a conversation. Which side? Which makes sense. Mr. Howe says, there's other defense, they're out of their seats talking, passing the time of day. When they're consummate professionals, when they've rolled over, when time is life, when air evaporates, when water seeps in, does it make sense that they'd be sitting there on their rear ends in an enclosed place talking? Or does it make sense, like Mr. Page, the driver, will say, is I was trying to get Joey out of his harness, and I couldn't get him out. That's why it took me a long time to get out. They say the crew was negligent. The crew meaning Mr. Page, Mr. Brad, or they panicked. But every single person who'll testify says, you got to take off your harness to get out. You can't just stay there in the boat. And how do you take off your harness? There's a latch, not a button like there are at seatbelts. Well, when you undo the latch, the oxygen's cut off. Why? Because you need to get out. You need to get out. That's why you have this pony bottle right here. He finished. You'll see evidence. You'll see the pony tank, the gauge on it. It's gone. All that oxygen is gone. He needed air, and he needed professionals to get in air. And then they'll say, well, even these professional angels had trouble with the canopy, and they did. There's no question about it. They had trouble with the canopy. But you'll find out that they weren't familiar with the canopy latches. Right? That's not a good place to learn. It's not a good place to refresh yourself. You need to know how much to turn. Very clearly. And then finally, if you go to the next one, they have a technical defense under Florida law. They say that Superboat International is not a sponsor of this race. Really? No. When you have a boat race like this, you have to get permits, which is not a very good, not a very clear flow of. But this is the application for approval of marine event. And it's filed under oath with the United States Coast Guard. Right? You don't lie to the Coast Guard. And so what's the caption right here, which is hard to read? It says, name and address of sponsoring organization. Well, this was filled out by Mr. Carbonell. Superboat International Productions. Name of the sponsor, Superboat International Productions. The undersigned has full authority to represent the sponsoring organization. Signed, John Carbonell. So they're not a sponsor for this case, but they're certainly a sponsor for the United States Coast Guard. Well, they got a permit. Good for them. And what does the permit say? The Coast Guard lists the sponsoring organization. What is it? Superboat International Productions, Incorporated. And then all the way through, we talk about event sponsor, event sponsor, event sponsor, event sponsor, event sponsor. So, if they weren't the event sponsor, then someone just flew in the middle of the night to sponsor this race. It makes no sense. It makes about as much sense you'll find under the evidence as the rest of their case. So that brings us to the second part of the case. Because there's two parts. And this part of the case is how do we evaluate a wrongful death? And in the state of Florida, the law helps. And the state of Florida provides guidance. And you'll hear that from Judge Rodriguez. Under Florida law, it's the policy of this state to transfer the losses from the survivors to the wrongdoers. They killed her husband. You need to measure the loss because it's a wrongful death. The economic damages, if you could go to that, that's the simple part. They actually were able to get a heartbeat back, and they took him to the hospital, and they took him to Miami, but he was brain dead. But they're like $50-some thousand in medical bills. That's easy. Bills are bills. Joey Grattan was a successful businessman. And over his life, he was a young man. He was in his 50s. Younger than me, anyway. He was in his 50s, and he earned money. And so we had an economist, Dr. David Williams, from Miami, who will testify. They measure what he would have brought to the family over the rest of his lifetime. And then they reduce it to present value. And those economic damages, the loss of support, is what you'd have made and brought home after you subtract your own expenses. About $1,700,000. The lost services are what do you do around the house? What kind of services do you provide? We all have lost services. We provide services, and economists can measure them. And that's about $1,970,000. That's the easy part. But those damages pale in comparison to the human damages. And the human damages are pain and suffering and grief. And so, if Joey Grattan had broken his back, he would have suffered a different kind of pain. But the pain and the suffering and the grief that we're talking about in a wrongful death case is different. It's like driving a stake in the heart of the survivor. It's serious, it's strong, it's lifelong. The human damages are measured, you'll hear from Judge Rodriguez about this, for the past 3 years since his death, and in the future until Priscilla Grattan dies. Because you suffer each of the past 3 years until the day she dies. And you'll hear evidence about that to make it easier for you to do your job. And then, because this occurred in the water, Joey Grattan has a claim of the case for his pain and his suffering. And that 3 minutes or 4 minutes that he took for the water to enter his lungs, for him to cough and fight, and then lose consciousness. And the evidence will show that's not a good way to die. It is a scary, black, dreadful way to die. And it shouldn't happen. So in order to measure this, in order to measure the loss, we have to find out what kind of a man Joey Grattan was. Well, he knew Priscilla since high school. He was 2 years older than she was. She adored him from afar, but he really didn't have much to do with her at that time. He was like the consummate athlete. He was a big man on campus. He was a basketball player, a baseball player. He became a champion in motocross. And then, later in life, he became his age group tennis champion for the state of Florida. And he was a coordinated, athletic guy. He was kind and he was helpful. He was, among the boating community and people who knew him, he was an icon. They loved him. He walked into a room and he had a magnetic personality. You wanted to be with him. A party was not the same without Joey Grattan. An event was not the same without Joey Grattan. He had a big smile. He was a big guy. He was a fit guy. And he was a kind guy to everyone. He was a devoted father. They had 2 boys, twin boys. And you'll hear them testify. They're 30 years old now. And he was a loyal and affectionate husband. And they had some marriages are tighter than others, and different things work for different people. And this is one of those tight, affectionate, both people in the same room, marriages. Finally, he was a good businessman. They had 3 businesses. He used to work for a car dealership. He was the service manager. And then when the economy tanked, they started a trolley business. Started a pawn shop, and that did well. And then they had a second one. And then a stable business, which doesn't make a lot of money, but you can rent out stables so people have horses. It was good. It was quick. So, the last day, let's go to the next one. You see Priscilla and Joey shortly before his death. And those are their 2 boys, Brock and Blake. And this is one of the boys' weddings.
And he was just, that kind of a smile is just how he was. Big, smiling guy. Good husband, good friend, good person to be with. Not a man you wanted as a throttle man, kind of man you wanted as a business partner, kind of man you wanted to have a beer with. A good guy. So, on the last day of Joey Groton's life, Priscilla and the two boys were there. You know, they could see the boats go around, so it's a long way. And they knew very clearly and very quickly that there was a rollover. And soon they knew it was their boat. But she wasn't particularly concerned because it had rolled over before and he knew what he was doing. He was always the first one out. He was the one who helped Steve Page get out of his harness. The boat could handle rollovers. So she had a lot of confidence. And then she heard that somebody had knocked out down. And then finally she heard them on the ship. So she meets them at the hospital. And this is her last memory. They said, he's still alive. Would you like to see him? And she came in and she screamed. Because his eyes and blue eyes were all black. The pupils were completely dilated. He was swollen and lumpy and didn't look like Joe. And they had to make the agonizing decision to turn off life support. And the funeral they had was attended by hundreds, by thousands. He was a very popular, well-liked, successful man. It was a tragedy in this community, the boat community, a tragedy for the family, and a tragedy for everybody who knew him. All right, so one of the ways we measure grief, we have to look at what happened with Priscilla. You'll hear Dr. Michael Hughes, and this is very interesting. He trained at Harvard. He was in charge of trauma psychiatry at Harvard, at the Dana-Farber Institute. And that's where they have cancer patients, primarily children's cancer patients. There's nothing more traumatic to a parent or to a child than facing the demise of their child. And here's what he says. He talks about death and grief. And the way that we measure grief, at least doctors do, is how central was that person to the survival. Was it your great aunt who was 95 years old? Or was it your father who's 92 years old? Was it your spouse? And there is, with the possible exception of the loss of a child, there is no one more central than your spouse. And there are intensifiers of grief. Are you able, did he have cancer? Was he able to say goodbye? Was there a long road? If it is sudden, a sudden death, that's more likely to cause a grief reaction. If it's unexpected, clearly this is unexpected. If it's painful or violent, it's an intensifier. And she imagines him suffering and struggling to get out. If it's wrong, in her mind, if it's wrongful or unjust, should this never have happened? Because that makes the grief worse. And then finally, was it preventable? If they had done even half of their jobs right, could his death have been prevented? Then it's rare. But in this case, Dr. Hughes will say, we have all 5 intensifiers. It was sudden, it was unexpected, it was painful, it was wrongful, it was unjust, and it was preventable. And all of those make for grief. There are stages of grief that you might have heard of. First stage is denial. This can't have happened. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and he'll be back. Well, that stage is over. The next stage is anger. This should never have happened. And in this case, she's wrong about that. Then depression. And then ultimately, resolution, if you get there. It doesn't mean you ever forget the person. It doesn't mean you love them. It doesn't mean you don't want them. But it means that you've come to grips with the scar in your heart. And some people never get past depression. And that's where she's stuck, according to Dr. Hughes. There are pain-relieving behaviors that people have when they're going through mourning. It doesn't mean they're crazy. It doesn't mean they're mentally ill. It's what people do when they really love someone and they can't get past being stuck in grief. And one is attachment. And so what is that? In her house, I asked her the other day, I asked Dr. Hughes, are his clothes still there? Every bit of clothing. When did you change the sheets? Not for a month. Because I wanted to have the sheets that smell. Has any picture been moved? No. We put more pictures up. Everything is the same. Everything's the same. Because it's attachment. Well, what about doing something else? What about trying to see someone else? No. I don't want to get him wrong. I want to be with him. And that's avoidance. You'll find from Dr. Hughes that the sudden and unexpected loss of a spouse is one of the most powerful losses a human being can suffer. And no one can dispute that in space. So, what is the effect of Joey's death on Priscilla? Well, she works. She has 3 jobs. She keeps herself busy. And she exists. She has 2 boys. It's a close-knit family. They're very close. That helps. But she doesn't get chained. She doesn't change. She hears his voice. She hears his voice. He talks to her. It doesn't mean she's crazy. But that's her life. And as I said, she doesn't want to live. His diagnosis, remember he's a doctor, is that she's got depression. And depression's not feeling sad or a little blue to death. Depression is a deep, dark place. I don't feel like living. If it weren't for my children, I wouldn't. I don't want to be here without him. That's depression. And she has post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not just military people who think that. When people see something that's stressful, visual, they hear it. She saw the rollover and she saw his body. And she doesn't just remember it. She experiences it. She sees it. She sees his body. And it comes back. And it comes back. And it moves her back further in the stages of grief. And so for the future, according to Dr. Hughes, she will suffer despair and pain and loss for the rest of her life. And so, at the end of this case, what you can do, you can't ever bring it back. You can't restore what she had. But you can measure the hurt, the loss, and the tragedy of one of the most powerful losses a person can suffer. The most powerful losses she'll ever suffer. You give her justice and the verdict. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our lunch break before we hear from the defense on their opening statement. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to get you back here outside the courtroom at 1:45. That gives you an hour and a half for lunch. Do not discuss the case. Do not research it. Don't look up any of the terms. Don't look up any GPS coordinates. Don't do anything that's at all related to this case. And again, don't have any contact or discussions about the case or anything you know about the case, either amongst yourselves or with anybody that may approach you while you're out to lunch. Go have a nice lunch, and we'll see you back here at 1:45. Thank you.